So, welcome, Andre Thornton. I just want to say what an honor it is to have this opportunity to speak with you today for this discussion on leading diverse teams and leading inclusive teams, two of our sub-themes that we're starting the academic year off with for September and October. As founder and CEO of Whitman Consulting since 2016, a company that specializes in helping people live on purpose, and as an alumnus, I thought you would have some great insights for our audience on those two sub-theme topics. So first, I'd like to talk with you a little bit about diversity and maybe the distinction between diversity and inclusion. And then you wanted to talk a little bit about your definition of leadership. We could even start there.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Catherine. It's so great to be with you. It's an honor to have this conversation. And I love the topic, obviously, because I've dedicated my entire life to this conversation. So I'll start with the definition of leadership. And leadership is such a fascinating word to me because there's so much information about leadership in the world. And what I found when I got into this space, I'm someone who's an introvert and I'm shy and I never wanted to be a leader. So the idea of me becoming a leadership development consultant was the furthest thing from my mind. What I realized though is leadership I needed to think of as an action, as a verb, and not as a quote unquote title. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that. So when we're talking about leading people, or we're talking about the concept of leadership, in my opinion, we can break that down to a very simple definition of inspiring action. So inspiring action. That means inspiring action first in ourselves. So we have to get ourselves inspired, and then we have to inspire action in other people. And I believe there's an actual process that we can use to teach people how to lead as a verb. And I'm an engineer, so engineers, we love processes. So what we've done with the firm is we've defined a 7-step process called the 7 steps to purpose-driven leadership that defines a process that people can use if they're looking for sort of a how-to on how to lead or how to inspire action. So I'll open with that as a definition for leadership as we jump into conversation on diversity and inclusion.
Well, that's interesting because we're starting off the academic year. A lot of cadets are coming here, some of them for the first time. And that idea that you just touched on kind of resonates with the idea of peer leadership, I would think. So let's talk a little bit about that distinction between diversity and inclusion as our cadets come back, keeping them in mind with what they may be facing, and then what kind of advice you have based on your experience, both as an alumnus and through your consulting work.
Great. Yeah. So peer leadership, actually, I remember my rat year at VMI, of course, as we all do. It was, in my opinion, the best leadership development experience because we had no formal authority over any of our brother rats, but you saw individuals emerge as leaders. And another really quick distinction I want to make about leadership is someone can be given a responsibility to manage a team. But in my opinion, you have to earn the right to lead each individual on that team. And so what happens at VMI and the Rat Line is you have people that come in on the same playing field, and you have these individuals that earn the right to be leaders within that group. They're not given the title, they earn the title. And so the idea of diversity and inclusion is, first, diversity is a definition of different types of people that are described and they're categorized in different ways. So this is everything from race, from gender identification, religion, ethnicity, everything that you can think of, the way people think, the way people speak, everything you can think of that makes us all unique is what diversity is. So what we really look for in any situation is to increase diversity, because everyone has these really unique talents to bring into an environment. And when we're able to bring those collective talents into an environment, we can achieve things that we couldn't achieve if we just had all of the same kind of person. So that's the first idea of diversity. And inclusion is, so let's say we have this great diversity initiative and we've filled the room with diverse people and we're trying to get things done and no one feels comfortable bringing their ideas to the table. No one feels comfortable, or certain groups perhaps don't feel comfortable bringing their ideas, implementing anything that they want to implement. They don't feel that they're empowered. They don't feel that they're at the dance, so to speak, but they're not invited to dance. That would be, yeah, there's all kinds of analogies on the, you know, I've heard diversity is you're invited to the dance. Inclusion is you're invited to actually dance at the dance. Participate, exactly. And then there's another term called equity. So it's diversity, equity, and inclusion. And equity is you're asked to give the DJ your playlist to play your songs at the dance. So that's an entire level. So just imagine the feeling of belonging as you go through those different layers from diversity, inclusion, and equity. But it's all about this feeling of belonging that each individual feels that they're in a place that they belong and they can bring their full selves into it to do the best work.
I was reading on your profile on your website too that you have a motto in your kitchen above the sink. And it says, change lives by helping people reach their full potential. In light of this discussion on diversity and inclusion, can you talk about how others might embrace this motto for themselves?
So I think in order for us as individuals to integrate effectively with people that are different than us, we have to first sort of lead ourselves. And we have to first understand certain things about ourselves and about the human experience before we can embrace others and enable them and empower them. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So for someone that's coming into an environment, so someone that's starting the academic year, someone that's starting a new job coming out of school, one analogy I like to use that's really interesting that you don't hear people talk about much is, you ever notice when you buy a new car and the car has on its speedometer that it can go up to 140, 160 miles an hour, right?
Right.
But you never get to go 140 or 160 miles an hour.
Not legally anyway.
Not legally. And I've asked some people, I haven't found anyone that has actually taken it to the 140, of course, race car drivers, right? But doesn't it make you wonder, why wouldn't they just make the cars only go 70 or 80 miles an hour?
Right.
So beyond that question of why wouldn't they change it, I think what each individual does in any new environment, and this is something that I've studied and really understand about the human experience, we've all had a peak at that speedometer to know that we could actually do more. We all have this sort of sneaky suspicion that we're capable of doing more than sort of the rules kind of set out for us to do. So any environment that we step into, there's going to be rules and structures for us to do things a certain way, but we have this sneaky suspicion that we can achieve more. And that's the idea of unlocking potential.
That resonated with me because it also affects what people have told you about yourself.
Yes.
And so when you know what your speedometer can go to and you hear feedback sometimes, you say, that's not quite right. I know I have more in me. It's getting from where you are to where you want to be. And again, that's what kind of intrigued me about your motto of helping people reach that full potential.
Yes, absolutely. Great point, Catherine. So we're told these things, that's the suspicion is there, we've been told, but then we're like, oh, this just doesn't seem like, maybe there's got to be more, right? Maybe people move into their careers and they're trying to figure out what's more. So the reason I bring that up is the best leaders I've worked for and the best feedback I've gotten as a leader is to have someone say that they believe in me, or to tell someone that I believe in them. The feedback that I've gotten from others is that me believing in their potential, or me talking to my leader and feeling like my leader believes in my potential, is the best experience that I can have. And that is what inspired action is all about. So if we don't understand and believe for ourselves that there is potential to be realized, then it's really hard for us to engage with this diversity of people that we must engage with and see it for them when we don't see it for ourselves first. So that's kind of the connection of reaching your full potential to now first doing it for yourself and then being ready to lead.
Okay. Let's get back to this idea a little bit about leading diverse teams. Now we touched a little bit about cadets or new people coming into an organization where you've been invited to the dance, as you put it. How then does one emerge, I guess, as the person who is a natural leader or who is worthy of being respected? You talked about earning that respect. So talk a little bit about how that can happen, either how you're doing it as a business coach or in your role as a mentor.
Absolutely. So let me share some of this, kind of demystify it a little bit. The idea of respect, and I want to talk about trust a little bit. I want to talk about collaboration, and I want to talk about it all in the context of diversity. So, me being an engineer, as I mentioned, when I got into this space, I really wanted to understand how all of this works in terms of how do you inspire yourself to do things? How do you inspire other people to do things? And the first thing that I realized, one, leadership is an action. Two, that there's a difference between managing and leading, as I mentioned, and we have to inspire in order to lead. And then three is I looked at how to teach leadership, and I came up with these 7 steps, and I got into steps 4 and 5. It really helped me understand how to engage diverse people and inspire them. So step 4 is build trust of the 7 steps, and step 5 is ignite collaboration. So here's the idea. We can't inspire someone to collaborate with us if they don't first trust us.
Correct. Yeah.
So trust is one of those words that's thrown around, but it's not really explained in terms of, what is it? How do you build it? There's a great book called The Speed of Trust that's out there by Stephen Covey that talks about the concept in great detail. But here's what I learned when I went even beneath the surface on what trust is and how it's formed, because it's the important thing to do. It's kind of the glue before you can get to the respect. And there's science, there's neuroscience now. The last 10 years of neuroscience research has been phenomenal. So let me give you a really quick synopsis of what these scientists have figured out about emotions and how they drive behavior and what happens in the brain. So when things happen to us, I'm going to really simplify this concept. We have a natural reaction in our brain, and there's different parts of the brain. And to simplify it, there's our prefrontal cortex, where we think logically. There's our limbic system, which handles all of our emotions, and that's kind of back in this part of our head and the brain. When things happen to us, when our senses pick up on something, when someone says something to us, we have an initial, immediate emotional response. That information passes through our limbic system, and that emotional response can be literally categorized into a reward response or a threat response. So reward response is, I trust you, I want to engage with you. Threat response is, I'm moving away from you because I don't trust you. So in every conversation and every engagement that we have, our brains are constantly scanning for, can I trust or not trust this person?
Oh, interesting.
Is there a reward response or a threat response? This is every situation that we're in. So what happens when we're trying to lead diverse teams is we're engaging, we're having conversations, we're either automatically trusting or not trusting, and they're either automatically trusting or not trusting us. And what we can do is intentionally create engagements that allow people to feel a trust, and the neurohormone for that is oxytocin, where they feel a bond with us.
Right.
And we can actually create an engagement with them based on what we say and how we act. So I want to kind of give you that as a backdrop. What I have found is the superpower for anyone that's looking to lead a team, particularly a diverse team, is to develop the skill of empathy. Empathy. If people feel that we will hear them and understand their perspective, then they will allow themselves to be led by us. Back to the concept of we have to earn the right to lead other people. If we, as a leader, decide that we're not going to embrace the perspective of someone and what they're feeling, then we literally give up our ability to lead them. And what's happening right now, and this is a really difficult environment we're in, where everything is so divided, is we have people that are in these leadership roles and they're trying to lead groups as a whole, but because everyone feels like they're not being heard, they're kind of deciding who they want to follow and who they don't want to follow. Mm. So for example, let me give you another kind of hit home with a really specific example of this. So if I'm a leader, if someone is a leader and they want to lead a group and the conversation comes up about systemic racism, and the leader says, I don't believe systemic racism exists. And the person that they're trying to lead believes it does exist and it's something that they're dealing with. And the leader won't accept and at least try to empathize and understand that perspective, then we literally lose the ability to lead that person. People don't realize that we have these engagements, we have these conversations, and we're literally shutting down people's ability to trust us first, and then to want to engage and collaborate with us. One other thing I'll point out about this really interesting thing about neuroscience that I wish everyone knew. All of the blood, all the energy in our brain goes to the limbic system, and it literally shuts down our ability to think cognitively. It shuts down our strategic thought, it shuts down our perception, everything that we use to think strategically, it shuts down. So when something happens and we're triggered and we're reacting emotionally, we're not thinking logically. And this is why we're able to give better advice to our friends than we're able to give to ourselves. Because we're looking at the situation objectively. We don't have all the emotional chemicals firing around, kind of getting in the way of our strategic thinking. We can just look at a situation and say, oh, logically, you should do this or do that. But emotions are what drive our behavior. So we have to understand emotional intelligence and how all this stuff works if we want to effectively lead people.
Now, is that the term amygdala hijacking? Have
Yes.
you heard? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Exactly.
I have heard that term. Well, that's really good. So what I'm hearing you say is basically that until you have built trust, you cannot really hope to collaborate with others. And the first step, or one of the primary steps in building trust, is to develop your empathy. Do you have like a couple of, personally, I find it helpful if I have kind of a template to run by. For example, I took a writer's workshop, and the instructor there said, we're not going to critique each other's work. We're going to have wonderings. And so instead of saying you should do this or you should do that, or I didn't like this or I did like that, if you wanted to inspire that person to maybe reformat their content another way, you might pose your question as, I wonder if you explored this idea a bit more, what you would come up with. So using that phrase of I wonder. Another one is, could you clarify? And parallel to that one is, help me understand your thinking here. And being specific, do you have some tips or tools or things like that that you could share?
So one tool that we teach in our workshops and with our coaching is a concept called Alkea. So it's ALCEA. And this is a process to follow. It's a step-by-step process to follow when we're engaging in a conversation. So here's how this works. The A is ask. The L is listen. The C is clarify. The E is empathize. And then the A at the end is align. So the way that plays out in conversations, and as leaders, this is another interesting thing that has to be worked through. As leaders, one of the hardest things for a leader to do is say, I don't know the answer, because that hurts our confidence, right? That says that we're not competent, but that actually is one of the most effective leadership strategies that you can have, because what it does is it empowers the people around you to bring their answers to the forefront. And then you have a chance to see what kind of answers they may have that may be better than yours. And you can implement those ideas. And then that's the kind of thing that really, really gets people inspired. So ask is the first step. So literally, and this can be in any conversation that we're engaging with someone, but if you're working on a project or you're working on something, and ask the person how they feel, or ask them what their opinion is. Open-ended questions are great. Depends on the situation. And then listen. And listening is very interesting, because listening isn't just hearing, right? Listening
Correct.
is, we have to be intentional to listen. Like, I'm sitting here listening to you. I'm very carefully paying attention to every word, piecing it together, making sure it makes sense. And that helps me go to the next step of clarifying. So ask, listen, clarify. So make sure that you understand what you heard. And listening is body language, right? Clarifying is another way of demonstrating that you're listening, but it also helps you understand what it is that you're hearing and make sure that you understood it the right way. So you clarify what you think you heard. And then, as let's say they say, no, it's different, then you kind of go back to the beginning, ask again, listen again, clarify. But once you feel like you kind of got what they're saying, because they're like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Now you take a moment to empathize. And empathy is literally trying to put yourself in their shoes and imagine. And we can't imagine what it's like to be another person. But if we can, for a moment, try to imagine, take our own thoughts, our own biases off, and think about, wow, what must this person be going through, and really empathize with them. Then what that does is it allows us to connect with their experience. And it also gives us what we need to understand to go to that final letter, which is align, and to see if there's anything within what they're experiencing and what they're trying to accomplish that we can align our experiences and what we're trying to accomplish too. So this is sort of Alkia is sort of an action-oriented way to go through having these engagements where we're empowering the other person because we're asking and we're listening to them. And then at the end, we're looking for alignment in what it is that we want to do. And there may not be alignment. Not all conversations, many don't end in alignment, but we can always look for that alignment. And we may have our purpose and our goals and know what we want. But if we just go and tell them what our goals are and we don't ask them what their goals are and look at alignment, then we may lose a great opportunity to lead them instead of just managing them.
It seems like Alkia too would be a great tool for someone wanting to lead diverse teams and leading inclusive teams. It seems to check all the boxes on both those sides.
Yes, exactly.
So in your experience, what would you say has been the number one hurdle for people to lead diverse teams effectively? What do you run into the most there?
So the biggest challenge is one that is unseen because it is literally unconscious bias. So we all operate in this world thinking that we're in complete cognitive control of everything we do. But everything about science says that there's all these behaviors that are built into the way we approach the world and the way we do everything in the world that are unconscious. And we all have natural biases in what we do. And bias is not, it's termed a bad thing because, it's saying that naturally we kind of go to the negative inclination that it's saying, we're doing something that's unfair. But bias is a natural product of the way we function. Our brain has to categorize things. Otherwise, we would have to think about each and everything that we do and each and every engagement that we have. So our brain has to know that when we see fire, that's dangerous. That
Right.
when we see a wild animal, that's not a situation that we want to walk into. We need an immediate reaction. So bias is not a bad thing. It's a human thing. But the problem is because it's been categorized as a negative thing, many people don't want to admit that it exists. So the challenge that organizations will have is they're walking around with these biases and don't realize that it's impacting the way that they behave because it's happening unconsciously, but it's showing up in microaggressions, it's showing up in all these behaviors that's affecting the people. And again, remember, when we're having these engagements and people feel threatened, there's negative chemicals, the threat response is coming out, and it's taken away their ability to think cognitively. And keep in mind that we're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution where we've got artificial intelligence, machine learning, we have data analytics, we have all these technological advances where computers are taking over a lot of the sort of remedial task. And what we have to rely on is the human brain and emotional intelligence. And we need to be knowledge thinkers. So the leaders of today need to be thinking about, how am I affecting the brains of the people I lead? Because I need everyone to be knowledge thinkers in this space. So unconscious bias will cause us to do things like, for example, there's a study that said that 71% of leaders choose proteges that are the same race and same gender. And it's just a natural, we see someone that looks like us, they remind us of us. It's a natural bias to say, oh, wow, that's a future me. But if we allow that bias to exist, we'll do these things and not even realize the impact that they're having on the rest of the organization. So when unconscious bias is not realized in an organization, it can be a huge challenge. But there's another step once it's realized, is then how do you manage it effectively? How do you come up with a strategy for your culture that says these are the behaviors that we accept and we expect of our leaders, because it really is a leadership competence to be able to lead diverse teams. We can't have leaders that are competent at leading, but they can only lead certain groups of people. That's a limited leader.
Right.
So it is a true competence conversation and leadership and being able to lead diverse teams. So it's those organizations that are able to address the unconscious bias and then come up with a strategy to create a culture where they normalize not allowing the unconscious bias to drive people's behaviors.
So that kind of leads me to my next topic of inclusion. How does that person who has aspirations, how can they influence to be included so that they can open up those doors of opportunity?
Yeah, great question. So there's, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, there's kind of two sides of the conversation. There's the side of the conversation that says, how do you create the culture where everyone is treated fairly and equitably and inclusively, and they feel that they belong, and so the culture is that way. And then the other side of that is, for the underrepresented groups, how do you prepare them to feel empowered and empower themselves to grow into whatever it is they desire to grow into within the organization? So there's this sort of balance. So there's two things that we've picked up on as we work with organizations on how to effectively and most swiftly make the change. Mm-hmm. The first is, on the culture side, the senior leader of the organization. And if this is a company, it's the CEO. If it's a nonprofit or a government agency, it's whatever the leader is of that agency.
Or the board.
Of the board. And that senior leader has, and there's been all kinds of studies and things that have looked at, how to kind of work around if that senior leader is on board or not on board. But if you want to sort of streamline to the quickest way to change, is the senior leader being completely bought in, because that senior leader position has so much influence. There's all kinds of studies on power within an organization and how it works. So the senior leader being bought in and demonstrating through their actions that they're bought in, their words and their actions, is the fastest way to excite and energize the organization to create the culture that's needed. Mm-hmm. So it starts at the top. And then
top down.
Work its way down.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, there can be very specific learning opportunities provided for underrepresented groups that maybe help them navigate the environment that they're in more quickly. So one of the ways that we approach this, and it's working with anyone in an organization, around a concept called intrapreneurship. So if you talk to any CEO or any senior leader of an organization, most of them would say that they really would like for the employees or the people in the organization to take full ownership of the strategy that we're trying to implement, the results that are being delivered, whatever it is that has been put together as the charter, if you will, for the organization. Any senior leader would say, I would love if everyone would sort of just take full ownership of it and run with it.
Yeah, some people around here call that third level initiative. So you're not first level being your wait to be told, second is that you anticipate and you prepare. Third is you actually come up with that original idea or initiative that's aligned with your organization's mission.
Yes, that is it exactly. So
Mhm.
the third level is being an entrepreneur. If you're in an environment that you're not sure if the support is there, I mean, you really have a decision to make at that point. And the decision is maybe not as simple as you think. So one might say, oh, you just leave the organization and you go find somewhere else that you can grow. And that's an option. Many people do that. But another really interesting approach is to figure out how, within your scope of control and influence, you can affect change. And by that, I mean, so if you're trying to get a new initiative launched in that organization, and you get pushback at first, then sorting out how to navigate that organization and the stakeholders in that organization and align and tweak your idea to fit within that organization and fit within those different stakeholders is actually a very, very powerful skill to develop. Because I think many times people think that when we first have an idea, that idea is going to work. And having been an entrepreneur now for 4 years, the number one thing I can tell anyone that's starting is that their first idea is not going to work. I can absolutely guarantee. Now, not to say that the idea won't work at all, but there's some things about the idea and the way it's implemented that will have to be tweaked in order for it to work. And the reason this is a concept called systems thinking, and systems thinking is a very powerful concept. But one of the things in it that I'll share that's relevant to this conversation is everyone has their own mental models of what the world is. And we have our own mental model, and that's where our ideas and our beliefs and everything comes from. And then we try to drop, based on our mental model, our idea into the world. And the world has all these other mental models, all these other perspectives. And if we think we're just going to get the world on board with our perspective, that's a really, really hard way to go about it. And so the successful entrepreneurs and the successful intrapreneurs are the ones that bring the idea forward. If there is pushback, they're able to figure out, okay, well, what within it can work? How can we make tweaks here? Where can there be a compromise there? And get this to align so that we can ultimately move it forward. And there's real power in learning how to navigate that implementation of an idea when you get the initial pushback.
Yeah, I like that wording too of being able to compromise, taking a look at what is going to be workable within the boundaries of what you're allowed to work with. Thank you so much, Andre, for all your words of wisdom, for all your insights and your experience and the impact that you are having and continue to have here at VMI.
Thank you, Catherine. It's been a pleasure. And if I had to kind of leave one word of wisdom around all of this, it would go back to the concept of potential. And the best leader is the leader that sees potential in other people, even to the point where the potential that they see in the other people is more than the potential that the leader sees in themselves. So they don't limit
Right.
anyone's potential. And those are the most inspiring leaders. So hopefully everyone can gravitate to this idea of understanding the concept of potential and back to the speedometer and how fast can we really go,
Yes.
and enabling that for everyone, and pay attention to if we decide to enable it for one group versus another group, and make sure that we're enabling that equitably. So that would be my final word, and you do amazing things.
Well, thank you so much. Again, great words of wisdom, and I look forward to sharing this out with our audience.